you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Thank you for coming to listening to me. You're in for quite a treat today because you have two of Britain's top anti-Semites speaking together on the same platform. We are literally the two devils in disguise, or maybe not in disguise. What can I say? The first thing is that all this stuff about anti-Semitism has nothing at all to do with anti-Semitism whatsoever. It's a complete blind and a complete smokescreen. What it is quite simple. If you want to justify a state that 3-4 weeks ago demolished the Bedouin village of al-Hiran in Israel's Negev. Israel's Negev is a desert area. It's unoccupied 98%, but they decided to demolish a Bedouin village in order to replace it with a Jewish village called Hiran, then it's very difficult to defend that. It's very difficult to defend the fact that you have administrative detention in Israel and the only people who are detained without trial, sometimes for years on end, are Palestinians. It's very difficult to defend the fact that you've just passed a law which retroactively legalises the theft of Palestinian land. It's very difficult to defend the fact that you have two different legal systems on the West Bank. One for Palestinians and one for Jews. In most people's understanding of the word, that is of course apartheid. It is certainly racist. It's far better to cast aspersions that people are anti-Semitic or they're racist in some way, rather than to actually deal with the issues concerned. And therefore that's the first point I want to make, that the anti-Semitism crisis or the allegations or the hysteria that's grown up has nothing whatsoever to do with anti-Semitism. It has everything to do with Israel's record and Zionism's record in the Middle East. And Israel doesn't, of course, operate in a vacuum. It receives more aid from the United States than every other country in the world put together. So Israel is a very important strategic partner of the West in the Middle East, and therefore it needs defending. And one of the ways you defend it is by saying that anyone who criticises it is anti-Semitic. They're singling it out. Well, yes, we are singling out Israel in one respect, because it's the only apartheid state in the world. It's the only state in the world which says one section of the population will have privileges, Jews, and those who are not Jews will not have privileges. There are many repressive states in the world, I grant you, but there is only one racist state, and there's only one apartheid state. Now the Zionists come back and say, but there's only one Jewish state as well. And I have an answer to that. It goes back to 1789 with the French Revolution, which established emancipation. The first people who benefited from emancipation were Jewish people, ironically. And the French Revolution established a very important principle, which is the state and religion should be separate. And that is a cardinal principle, for example, of the American Constitution, that religion and state should not be intermixed. Yet in Israel, the privileges you have, for instance, I have the right to go to Israel anytime I want and claim citizenship, and I will get privileges, access to land, access to grants, and so on and so forth. But for instance, Yasser over there, who is a Palestinian, he may have been born there, his family may have been born there, they have no such right because they are not Jewish. Now anyone tell me that that is not racist, and I will say that's double Dutch, that's illogical, that simply does not make sense. And therefore, you have to accuse people of anti-Semitism in just the same way that when Britain went to India, it didn't go to India because it didn't say it was going to India in order that it was exploiting the natural wealth of India. Britain didn't justify what it was doing on the basis it was pillaging and raping and whatever, and stealing the wealth of India. No, it went there because it was civilizing India, because it was getting rid of sati, a particularly reprehensible Hindu custom of burning widows on the pyre of their husbands and so on. They were the reasons why Britain went to India. The empire was a burden on the white man's back, if you like. It was the land where the sun never set, And some people said that was because God never trusted the British. But that was by the by. The fact is, we always went there with noble intentions. And it wasn't just the Conservative Party, or the Whigs as it was then, who justified the empire. The Labour Party did too. The Labour Party did it in terms of what you call trusteeship, that we held the lands of Africa and Asia in trust for the native people until they came up to our standard of civilization. We won't go there. I think we all understand what that means. And it's the same with anti-Semitism today. So when America supports Israel, it doesn't, or Britain supports Israel, it doesn't do it because of its colonization. It doesn't do it because, for instance, Jewish mobs go around Jerusalem every Jerusalem Day and chant death to the Arabs, or Muhammad is a whore, or all the other things that they do when Arabs have to stay in their homes so they don't get attacked by thousands of settler youth. It's because of anti-Semitism. It has something to do vaguely with the Holocaust and so on. And so we should be absolutely quite clear that to oppose Zionism, to oppose what Israel is doing, is in no way anti-Semitic. I mean, the definition of anti-Semitism is remarkably simple. You don't need to be a genius to work out that it is hostility to Jews as Jews. It's simple. I mean, an Oxford academic, a friend of mine, Brian Klug, worked that out years ago. But the government has a problem, and the problem is how to associate anti-Semitism with Israel. And therefore, they came up in 2004 with what they called the working definition, the European Union Monitoring Committee working definition of anti-Semitism, which met a lot of resistance. The University College Union opposed it, the National Union of Students opposed it, and a lot of other civil society groups opposed it. And in 2013, the successor agency to the EUMC, the European Union Monitoring Committee, took it down from its website, and it basically fell into abeyance. However, the Zionist monster is a multi-headed hydra, and it has grown again, and it's become something called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, for those of you who are aware. It first surfaced, in my memory, a few months ago when the Home Affairs Select Committee produced a report on anti-Semitism, which, apart from criticising Jeremy Corbyn and Shami Chakrabarti as tolerating anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it also came up with this new definition. And if I can have a look at this definition, it takes nearly 500 words to say something which should take about 15 words at most. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel than their own nations. Well, if I had £1 for every time I've been called a traitor because I'm an anti-Zionist, then I'd be quite rich, in fact. It is the essence of Zionism that Jews owe a dual loyalty. In fact, Jews' main loyalty is to Israel, is to the so-called Jewish state. And a Jewish state, which is what Israel calls itself, it's not what I call it, it's quite clear. The Jewish state represents not just its own Jewish citizens, but Jews throughout the world, wherever they can be found. And that is why Israel is quite unique. Most countries have a citizenship based on that country to which everyone belongs. And they also have a nationality. So in Britain, there is a British nationality. And some people will say, no, there's an English, a Scottish, a Welsh, etc. There is a nationality which applies to everyone who lives in a particular place. So if Scotland had become independent, the SNP made it clear that everyone who was living in Scotland would have Scottish nationality, for example. The same with France, the same with Germany, the same with other countries. But in Israel, quite uniquely, there is no nationality. There is no Israeli nationality, although it says on its passport there is a nationality. But if you look at the Hebrew word, it's Israhut, which translates as citizen, not nation. But they assume that most people are too stupid to realise the difference. In Israel, there is a Jewish nationality, and there are hundreds of other nationalities, primarily Arab, Islamic, Christian, and any other religion, etc. But there is only one nationality which counts, and that is Jewish. And the Jewish nationality applies not only to Jewish citizens and to Jewish residents, but Jews wherever they live. And that, to me, is racist in itself. And that is the foundation stone of Israeli racism. That some people, because of this idea that Jews who go to Israel are returning, in the idea that you were there 2,000 years ago, your ancestors, and somehow you're returning to the land whence you came. It is, of course, one of the many racist myths that propound. There are other, the definition, denying the Jews the right to self-determination. That's anti-Semitic. In other words, opposing the very idea of a Jewish state. The right to self-determination. I mean, I asked, Joan Ryan was someone who, I don't know if any of you heard of her, she's a Labour MP and she's chair of Labour Friends of Israel. And she was wittering on at some point about the Jewish right to self-determination and how it was anti-Semitic to oppose it. So I wrote her a letter, an open letter, to which, being the rude person she was, she never replied. And I asked her, when exactly did Zionism talk about the Jewish right to self-determination? Because it was a very recent affair. If you look back into Zionist documents, I actually have a book here, The Jewish State. It talks about colonization. This is by Theodor Herzl. He was the founder of the Zionist movement. The first Zionist Congress was in 1897, and it was called together as a result of the publication of this pamphlet called The Jewish State. It's a formational and foundational publication of the Zionist movement. The Zionists never talked about national self-determination. They talked about colonies and colonization. That was the language of the Zionist movement for most of its history. But in order to, if you like, come in with the new zeitgeist, as it were, the mood of the moment, it is now Jewish national self-determination. But what that actually means is that Jews are not part of the nations in which they reside. So instead of being a French Jew, or a British Jew, or a German Jew, or an Argentinian Jew, you're just Jewish. It's just like Catholic. I mean, the idea that all Catholics form one and the same nation is a completely retrogressive step. On the contrary, in many ways, it's an anti-Semitic argument, because what it says is that Jews don't belong in the places that they actually live in. They actually are all one and the same. And I can give you, so I mentioned Theodor Herzl. He's a very important figure. Do Google him if you haven't heard of him before. He was someone, he was a Viennese journalist who operated in Paris. And he is actually quite interesting, if you read his diaries, all 4 volumes of them, because he was quite clear that without anti-Semitism, he described anti-Semitism as having something of the divine will to good about it. In other words, without anti-Semitism, there would be no Zionism at all. Anti-Semitism provided the propulsion, if you like, for Jews separating out of their own nations and then going on to form what he hoped would be a Jewish nation. And he travelled around Europe trying to win an alliance between the Zionist movement and one of the imperial powers at the time. Eventually, in 1917, as you know, this is the centenary year, the Zionist movement reached an agreement with the British imperialists, the Lloyd George War Cabinet, and it was called the Balfour Declaration, in which Britain promised to the Zionists the land of Palestine over the heads of the Palestinians themselves, who were never asked for their opinion. They agreed there would be... 2 minutes. Okay, right. I'm running even later than I thought. So I was going to tell you a story about Herzl when he was doing his rounds amongst the royal houses of Europe. He came upon a man, the uncle of the Kaiser of Germany, called the Grand Duke of Baden. And he said to the Grand Duke said to him, to Herzl, I agree, I support you, it's a wonderful idea, because Herzl was telling him that the Jews, Zionists were taking the Jews away from the revolutionary, from the socialist movements, and moving them towards a pure national ideal. And the Grand Duke said to him, I have no problems supporting Zionism, except for one problem. And he said, that one problem was this. If I support you in the Zionist movement, which at that time was very small, because up to 1945 only a handful, a tiny minority of Jews were Zionists, if I support the Zionist movement, then people will accuse me of being anti-Semitic. Because that was a viewpoint at the time. Most Jews considered Zionism to be a form of Jewish anti-Semitism. We're celebrating or not celebrating the Balfour Declaration. How many people know that on the Lloyd George War Cabinet, the one member who opposed the Balfour Declaration was its only Jewish member, Sir Edwin Montagu, who later became the Secretary of State for India. He accused all his fellows of anti-Semitism. They didn't want Jews in Britain, but they were quite happy for them to go to Palestine. And that is the reality of what we're opposing. So today, when they accuse people who oppose Israel of being anti-Semitic, it's actually the opposite. It's the Zionist movement which has always held that Jews do not belong in these countries. They should go to Israel. We see that today with the election of Donald Trump. And there has been an outbreak of anti-Semitism. And the Zionist movement in America has no problem with that, because Donald Trump is a good supporter of Israel. And his appointment of Steve Bannon was welcomed by the Zionist Organization of America, which had invited him to be a guest speaker at its annual gala in New York a few months ago. He didn't attend because there was a large Jewish demonstration, the leftists and anti-Zionists and so on, outside it, so he thought better of it. But the fact is, even today, ironically, if someone tells me that I don't belong in this country, they're either a Zionist or they're an anti-Semite. Thank you.